Some men never expect the woman they betray to have the nerve to walk out of the story they wrote for her. At exactly 6 p.m, Elena Hart stood in the bridal suite of the Ashcombe Manor, staring at her own phone lighting up on the vanity table. Julian's phone. He'd left it charging while he went to check on the boutonnieres, and it hadn't stopped buzzing for the last 2 minutes, the same contact over and over. She wasn't the type to go through anyone's phone. She'd never had a reason to be. But the fourth call came through as a video call instead, and it connected itself the second her hand brushed the screen trying to silence it. Bianca Ray's face filled the display, propped against a hotel pillow 2 floors up, in a robe that wasn't hers. "Did you talk to your father yet? Because I'm not doing this again after today. Once the ring's on her finger, I want a date, Julian, a real one." A voice answered from off-screen, Julian's voice, low and amused, close enough that Elena realized with a cold drop in her stomach that he must be standing just outside her own door. "Relax, she's not going anywhere. Elena doesn't ask questions, that's the whole reason I picked her." Elena's thumb found the end call button before she even decided to press it. 380 guests were downstairs. Her mother's antique lace veil was hanging on the back of the door, and the man she'd spent 4 years believing in had just told his mistress, in his own voice, exactly why he'd chosen her, because she was easy. She didn't cry, she didn't throw the phone. She set it down exactly where she'd found it, squared its corners to the edge of the vanity, and walked out into the hallway to find air that didn't smell like his cologne. She didn't get very far. At the end of the corridor, seated alone in a wingback chair that had clearly been placed there for someone far more important than a bridesmaid to occupy, was Marcus Vane. 2 men in dark suits stood a respectful distance away, not quite looking at her, not quite looking at anything, the particular stillness of men paid to notice everything while appearing to notice nothing. Everyone in 3 states knew the name, even if most of them only said it in lowered voices. Marcus Vane didn't run a company so much as an empire that used paperwork the way other men used camouflage, shipping routes nobody asked too many questions about, private lending that came with terms no bank would dare offer, entire blocks south of the river that changed hands quietly whenever Marcus decided they should. People who crossed him didn't always disappear, but enough of them did that no one tested it twice. Julian was, unofficially and very officially, his son and heir to all of it, the legitimate parts and the parts nobody put on paper at all. He looked up before she said a word, the way a man looks up who has been listening to a hallway for a while and already knows something has gone wrong in it. "You're not supposed to be up here," Elena said, because it was the only sentence her mind could produce. "Neither apparently is my son's fiancé," Marcus said, nodding once toward the phone-shaped bulge in her clutch, "given the color of your face." Elena's back found the wall before her knees fully decided whether they'd hold her. "How long have you been sitting there?" "Long enough to hear a phone ring 4 times through a door that doesn't close all the way." He said it without apology, the way other men might mention the weather. "I didn't listen on purpose, I heard enough by accident." She should have been embarrassed. Instead, something in her simply went quiet, the way a house goes quiet after a storm passes rather than during it. "Then you know." "I know my son is a fool," Marcus said. "I've known that for longer than you have, if it helps." "It doesn't," her voice cracked on the second word and she hated it. He rose from the chair unhurried, buttoning his jacket with the kind of calm that made grown men in boardrooms sit up straighter. Up close, he had the sort of face that had clearly been handsome once and had traded some of it for something better, the stillness of a man who'd stopped needing to prove anything to anyone. 300 people are about to watch you marry a man who just told his mistress, in his own words, that he chose you because you're easy to fool, Marcus said. "I'd like to offer you an alternative to walking down that aisle today. You don't have to take it, but I'd rather you hear it from me before you hear congratulations from anyone else." Elena stared at him. "You're his father." "I'm aware." "You want me to what, marry you instead?" The words came out sharper than she meant, disbelief doing the talking. "In the next 20 minutes. I want you to stop being a casualty in a story someone else is writing for you, Marcus said. Whatever you decide to do next, leave through the kitchen, walk down that aisle anyway and make your own decision about it later, or do something considerably more interesting. You should decide it. Not him, not the guest list, you. For a moment neither of them said anything. Down the hall, a bridal coordinator's heels clicked past an intersecting corridor, oblivious, calling out 15-minute warnings to no one in particular. Why do you even care? Elena asked quietly. You barely know me. Something shifted behind his eyes, not softness exactly, but its more disciplined cousin. 18 months ago your father's hardware store owed money to people who worked for me, Marcus said. The kind of debt that doesn't get forgiven quietly and doesn't usually end with the shop still standing. I had it bought out, and the terms rewritten before anyone came to collect the way they normally collect. I did it because the man who ran that shop drove 40 minutes each way twice a week to teach woodworking to kids at the county centre for free, and never once mentioned it to anyone, not even to ask why the terms had suddenly changed. I make it a habit of knowing who my organisation touches and who their children are. Elena's mouth went dry. That was you, your people. Mine. I never met your father myself. I didn't need to. I already knew what mattered about him. Marcus reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a single black card. No name, no title, just a phone number etched in silver foil. This isn't a proposal, Miss Hart. I'm not asking you to become anything tonight, and I'm not going to pretend the world I'm offering you a door into is a clean one. I'm giving you the door anyway. What's behind it is entirely up to you. Footsteps sounded from the far stairwell, quick, familiar, groom's shoes on marble footsteps. Julian's voice called out, easy and untroubled. Elena, coordinator says we're up in 10. Marcus didn't so much as glance toward the sound. You have about 40 seconds before he turns this corner, he said. Whatever you decide. No one is going to make that choice for you, least of all me. Elena looked down at the black card in her palm, then at the ring on her finger. A ring Julian had slid on with a speech about forever, 4 short days ago. While looking her directly in the eye and meaning, she now understood none of it. She thought of every night she told her sister Julian was just busy, every anniversary rescheduled around his board obligations, every time she'd caught the smell of a perfume that wasn't hers and decided, deliberately, not to ask. She'd called that patience. Watching it now from the outside in a hallway with a stranger who owed her nothing, she saw it for what it actually was. She slid the ring off her finger. Julian rounded the corner just as it happened, his easy smile catching and freezing when he saw his father standing 3 feet from his bride. Dad, a short, disbelieving laugh. What are you doing up here? Waiting to see what kind of man my son turned out to be, Marcus said. I have my answer. Elena, what's going on? Julian reached for her hand. She stepped back before he could take it, the ring still cool in her closed fist. Bianca says hello, Elena said. Or she would if she knew I could hear her through your own phone. The colour left his face in one clean drop. You went through my... It rang itself into a video call, Julian. I didn't have to go looking. You'd already told her everything I needed to know. Her voice didn't shake. That surprised her more than anything else that had happened in the last 10 minutes. You said I don't ask questions, that's why you picked me. That's not, I can explain. You explained it perfectly 4 minutes ago to someone else. She set her vows, folded twice, on the small table beside them, next to a vase neither of them had noticed until now. Those were written for someone who doesn't exist. Julian turned on his father, some last reflex reaching for the authority that had always rescued him before. Tell her this is insane. Tell her we can fix this before anyone downstairs even knows. Marcus adjusted his cufflink, unhurried. There's no version of the next 20 minutes where 300 guests don't learn who you are, Julian. The only question left is whether you tell them, or I do. You can't just stand there and let her. I'm not letting her do anything, Marcus said. I'm the first person all day who's asked her what she wants instead of assuming it. Julian's eyes swung back to Elena, something like panic finally breaking through the practiced charm. "You cannot be seriously considering whatever he just offered you." Elena looked between the two of them, one man who had spent 4 years teaching her to make herself smaller so his life would run smoother, and one who had just handed her a door with nothing attached to it but her own choice. She thought about fear, and how much of her life it had already been allowed to decide. "I'm done asking permission to matter," she said, "to either of you." She turned toward the staircase before Julian could answer, Marcus falling into step beside her. Not leading, not trailing, simply walking with her, the way you'd walk beside someone whose pace you had no interest in setting. They came down the staircase together into a ballroom mid-toast, 300 faces swinging toward the entrance expecting a bride on her father's arm. Instead, they found Elena Hart walking beside Marcus Vane, and the room's confusion turned instantly, audibly electric silverware setting down, a photographer's shutter firing on reflex, the string trio losing the thread of whatever they'd been playing. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He never had to. Half the room owed him something, and the other half had heard enough stories to know better than to make him repeat himself. The room went quiet the way a room goes quiet for a judge, not a host. "Thank you all for coming today," he said. "There won't be a wedding this evening. I'd rather you hear that from me than read it somewhere else tomorrow." A ripple of whispers, he let it pass. "My son made choices today that have nothing to do with the woman standing beside me, and everything to do with the kind of man he currently is. That's on him to answer for. It isn't on any of you, and it certainly isn't on Miss Hart, who has done nothing tonight but discover the truth with more grace than most of us could manage." Somewhere near the back, Julian appeared in the doorway, and 300 heads turned toward him instead. No cameras defending him this time, no charm quick enough to outrun what had already been said in the room. Elena stood very still beside Marcus, feeling something settle in her chest that she didn't have a name for yet. Not triumph, something quieter, the simple physical fact of not shrinking. The story should have ended there if it had been anyone else's story. Instead, 3 weeks later, Elena walked into the Vane Family Trust's Tuesday morning meeting carrying a laptop bag instead of a bouquet, in a grey blazer instead of anything borrowed or blue. Marcus had offered her a role helping restructure the Trust's community lending arm, the legitimate front of an operation everyone in that boardroom understood ran considerably deeper than its filings suggested, and the same quiet channel that had once bought her father's debt, without either of them knowing his name. She hadn't taken the job because he'd offered it out of guilt. She'd taken it because she'd read the Trust's numbers and found 4 separate ways they were quietly bleeding the small business owners they claimed to protect, and she wanted to be the one who fixed it. And because she'd decided, she'd rather understand exactly what she was walking into than pretend it wasn't there. Nobody made room for her at the table out of politeness. Some of the men in that room had reputations of their own, and none of them trusted a woman who'd walked in off a cancelled wedding to know anything worth listening to. Her first proposal got picked apart for 40 minutes. She welcomed every question. By the time she walked the room through her 3rd revision 2 weeks later, a lending model that cut default risk without squeezing the small shop owners who needed it most, the objections had run out. "Why wasn't this built years ago?" one of the directors finally asked. Elena didn't answer that one. She let the silence answer for her. Julian showed up to that same meeting uninvited, the way he'd always shown up to rooms assuming they'd rearranged themselves around him. This time, no one looked up. "Can we talk?" he asked her afterward in the hallway. "If it's trust business, my door's open at 2. "It's not trust business. Then there's nothing left to talk about." He glanced toward his father, waiting for the old reflex, for Marcus to smooth it over, the way powerful men are supposed to smooth things over for their sons. Marcus only folded his hands. "You're really going to let her take my seat?" Julian said. "No one took anything from you," Marcus said. "You handed it over the day you decided your name would always be enough. It stopped being enough the moment you needed it to cover for you." Julian left without another word. For the first time since Elena had known him, he didn't have one. Autumn came to the Vane estate slow and gold, and Elena found herself, 6 months into a life she hadn't planned, measuring her days by something other than someone else's approval. The lending program had expanded past every early projection. 2 neighborhoods that had been written off by every bank in the city now had working capital and a waiting list of other neighborhoods asking to be next. Every article about it mentioned her name. She kept redirecting the credit to her team, and Marcus noticed every single time she did it. One evening after a long week, he asked her to walk the orchard behind the main house before either of them went home. The trees were heavy with the last of the season's apples, lantern light catching gold in the leaves. "You've done more with that lending desk in 6 months than 3 consultants managed in 6 years, he said. "I only built on what your instincts already got right." That's precisely what someone who's actually good at this says. He stopped near the low stone wall at the orchard's edge, and for the first time since she'd known him, she heard something in his voice that wasn't entirely certain of itself. "There's something I should have told you before now." She turned to face him. "I'm listening." "When Julian first brought you around, I hoped you'd be good for him. I thought foolishly that a person like you might be exactly what he needed to grow into someone worth the name he was born with." He exhaled, slow. "When it became clear he had no intention of growing into anything, I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere in your relationship. I've regretted that more than almost anything else I've stayed quiet about." "You're not responsible for the choices he made." "No, but I was responsible for staying silent once I suspected he'd stopped seeing what he had standing next to him." He looked at her directly, none of the calculation she'd once been sure must be underneath it. "What I offered you in that hallway wasn't about punishing my son. That fades fast. What I felt standing there had nothing to do with him at all. I'd admired you for a long time before that night, how you handled your father's business, how you treated the people beneath you exactly the way you treated the people above you. Somewhere along the way, admiration turned into something I wasn't prepared for." Elena felt her eyes sting, not from sadness but from the plain fact of hearing something offered with nothing attached to it. "You know what surprises me most," she said. "I used to think love had to announce itself. You're the first person who's ever shown me it can just stay quietly, every day without needing credit for it." She took his hand. He held it like something he intended to keep holding. A year later, under a different roof than the one where it had all started, Elena stood at the edge of a small garden ceremony with no press line and no seating chart built for cameras, just the people who had actually walked the last year with her. Marcus met her halfway down the aisle instead of waiting at the end of it. An old habit of his she'd come to understand, meant more than any grand gesture could. "Ready?" he asked her. "For the first time in my life, completely." His only vow that afternoon was short. "I can't undo what happened to you before I knew you. I can promise you'll never again wonder whether you're valued in a room I'm standing in." Her answer was shorter. "You didn't rescue me from anything. You just stood still long enough for me to realize I already knew how to save myself." Months later, the trust opened a new small business resource center named for her father, the same man whose hardware store had first crossed Marcus's desk as a line item. Julian attended the ribbon cutting from the back of the crowd, on Elena's own invitation, humbled in the particular way that only losing everything he'd assumed was guaranteed can humble a person. He'd taken a modest role in the trust's outreach arm, rebuilding something slower and less glamorous than what he'd once had, on the theory that character, unlike a name, has to be earned twice, once to have it and once more to get it back. Elena greeted him with the same quiet courtesy she gave anyone else. Marcus shook his son's hand without warmth and without cruelty, just the plain acceptance of two people choosing, finally, to let the past be the past instead of a debt still being collected. As the sun dropped low over the block that had once nearly lost her father's shop, Elena slipped her hand into Marcus's, and neither of them said anything for a while. Some endings don't need a speech. They only need someone who stayed.